Welcome to Frederick Douglass, Legacy of an Abolitionist, organized by the Frederick Douglass Sculpture Committee. My name is Dumas Fils Lafontaine. I am consultant to the Frederick Douglass Sculpture Committee. We have a very exciting webinar for you today with a cadre of professionals who are best at what they do. Let me start by introducing Aziza Robinson Goodnight. Aziza, an avid artist, activist, entrepreneur, and community organizer, is a woman committed to shaping, re-energizing, and creating systemic, sustainable changes in her native Boston and beyond. According to Aziza, communities need artists and could not survive without a creative perspective. Quote, creative individuals are the essence of a thriving community. It always takes the artist to see the beauty and endless possibilities of a neighborhood. End of quote. The daughter of Paul Goodnight, famed painter and entrepreneur, best known for his vibrant depictions of Black culture around the world, an employee of the family-owned business Color Circle Art Publishing Incorporated, that was founded 25 years ago. Aziza was literally born into the arts, having grown up in the piano factory, a historical art space well noted for its artist living spaces, arts advocacy. Sitting on multiple boards and advisory committees for several of the developments that are happening throughout the city, she's privy to how difficult and beautiful change can be, and believes that true community is possible only when the people of the community are included in the development process. Quote, I have committed myself to community years ago and will continue to serve my community as long as I am able, because of the elders before me that paved the way for me to excel. At this moment, I'd like to welcome Aziza and pass on the baton to her.
Thank you, Dumas. I've never heard my bio read out loud, and that was wonderful. I first would like to thank everybody that's joining us today, and anybody who listens to this beyond today. I would love to thank everyone who's here, who's been part of the process of the Frederick Douglass Sculpture Project for this almost a decade or a little bit. We are happy to have this panel, this wonderful panel of individuals, and our wonderful moderator, Lamerchi Frazier. I'm going to start with a short little history on the Frederick Douglass Sculpture Project. So I'm the chair of the Frederick Sculpture Project. I came to this process and was alerted to the possibilities of a sculpture of Frederick Douglass through the past president of the United Neighbors of Lower Roxbury, Nataka Creighton. She was really excited about a possibility of a sculpture in the Frederick Douglass district, and I ran with her vision. So we brought on Dumas Lafontaine as our consultant of this project, and then we officially joined with the city to work and make sure that this sculpture happens. It has been a long road. Since 2012, we joined with the city, and now we're here today, and we have all these wonderful partners that will be talked about by Lamerchi Frazier at the end of the panel. But first, I would like to introduce a wonderful woman named Dr. Yvonne Lallier, who is not only a member of the Friends of Melnia Cass Boulevard and United Neighbors of Lower Roxbury, but a 40-year resident of Lower Roxbury and an advocate for change. She has been around and advocating way longer than I have been born, and has paved the way for some of the work that I've been able to do today. So, with that being said, I'd like to pass the mic to Yvonne Lelaire.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Asisa. And thank you, Dumafis, for having invited me to this. I'm so honored to be part of this group. Um, it's a long history of improving the neighborhood where I live. And it's been a pleasure to be part of the neighborhood, part of every action that my predecessors, such as Nataka and Aziza, have done. And I hope that I can honor that in supporting this project. And with that, I would like to introduce our speaker, Cynthia Chong. Cynthia is a lecturer, a writer, and a co-founder and editor of the Rising Tide Foundation in Montreal, Canada. On July 5, 2020, Cynthia published an article about Frederick Douglass entitled A Historical Reminder of What Defines the United States as Told by a Former Slave on Strategic Culture. Cynthia's other writings can be found also on the Iranian. Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you, and thank you to the Frederick Douglass Sculpture Committee for inviting me to speak today on the remarkable life of Frederick Douglass. There is a great divide within the United States today, division as to what the character of the country has been in its past, and thus what it will become in its future. There are some who would argue that the United States was lost from its very inception, that the seed of empire was contained in its bloom. This is a very serious charge indeed, and if true, its implications are colossal and threaten the very foundation of what stands today. These are immense questions, and the answers we choose as a response will affect not only our lifetime, but the many generations that will follow after us. And thus it is very apt that we are here today to call back into memory and discussion the truly remarkable life of Frederick Douglass, who lived from 1817 to 1895, a great man who made extraordinary achievements despite being born into a terrible oppression. If we are to choose a guide to help us navigate through these difficult times, we would be hard-pressed to find someone more wise and more trustworthy than Frederick Douglass for this task. Douglass was born in Talbot County in the state of Maryland. Though it is impossible to know his exact date of birth, he gathered that the month of February 1817 is as accurate as possible. The name given to him by his dear mother was, in the words of Douglass, no less pretentious and long than Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey. Interestingly, his mother had included the name of a Roman emperor and the first president of the United States. Frederick's mother was believed to be the only slave in the region who knew how to read, but she was located at another plantation miles away and was only able to see Frederick as a child a handful of times before she passed away. Frederick recalls that in his youth, I was just as well aware of the unjust, unnatural, and murderous character of slavery when 9 years old as I am now, without any appeals to books, to laws, or to authorities of any kind, to regard God as our Father, condemned slavery as a crime. Already, by the age of 9, Frederick had set himself upon not only the idea of escape from this destitution, but was always mindful to an education wherever he could find it. Luckily, in this unhappy state, his adult friend, Miss Lucretia, daughter of Captain Anthony, the slaveholder of Frederick, arranged for Frederick at the age of 10 to be sent away from the plantations to live in Baltimore with her husband's brother, Hugh Old. It was in Baltimore that Frederick would learn how to read. Years go by, and at around the age of 15, Frederick is sent back to the plantations over a family squabble, and not surprisingly, is found to be wholly unfit for a life of hard labor as an obedient slave. He is thus promptly sent to Covey, the Negro breaker, as he was called, to lodge with for a period of 1 year. For 6 months, Frederick was whipped and beaten on a regular basis. From the dawn of day till the complete darkness in the evening, he was kept hard at work in the fields and was worked up to the point of his powers of endurance. Until one day he decides finally that it is better to resist and risk the consequences than continue to live such a contemptible life as a mere brute. He decides one day to simply refuse to be treated as an animal, not to strike back, but to oppose the striking. As Douglas recounts, a man without force is without the essential dignity of humanity. Human nature is so constituted that it cannot honor a helpless man, though it can pity him, and even this it cannot do long if signs of power do not arise. He only can understand the effect of this combat on my spirit who has himself incurred something or hazarded something in repelling the unjust and cruel aggressions of a tyrant. Covey was a tyrant, and a cowardly one withal. After resisting him, I felt as I had never felt before. It was a resurrection from the dark and pestiferous tomb of slavery to the heaven of comparative freedom. I was no longer a servile coward trembling under the frown of a brother worm of the dust, and my long-cowed spirit was roused to an attitude of independence. I had reached the point at which I was not afraid to die. This spirit made me a free man, in fact, though I still remained a slave in form. When a slave cannot be flogged, he is more than half free. He has a domain as broad as his own manly heart to defend, and he is really a power on earth. From this time until my escape from slavery, I was never fairly whipped. Several attempts were made, but they were always unsuccessful. Bruised I did get, but the instance I have described was the end of the brutification to which slavery had subjected me. Douglas would spend the remaining 6 months with Covey untouched. Ironically, the man who was to break Douglas's spirit had in fact invoked his first contact with a comprehensive freedom and had solidified his will to rise above the subjectification of slavery. No one would be able to contain Douglas as a slave from now on. Less than 2 years later, Douglas would organize with 5 of his peers a runaway plot. However, the day of their planned escape, before they had even a chance to start, they were discovered. It seems one of the members of their group had confessed the plan to his masters, so to speak, and notified them that Douglas had written them all fake passes granting them permission to travel. Luckily, they were able to get rid of the notes and no evidence was found against the group. However, evidence wasn't needed to condemn a slave. The damage was done and the word had gotten out that Douglas, already notorious for being the only slave in the area who knew how to read and write, was indeed the orchestrator and ringleader of the runaway plot, and the other slaveholders were demanding his removal from the region, accusing him of being a corrupting influence on the other slaves. Douglas was facing the very real possibility that he could be sent to the deep south for his transgressions, the most brutal life for a slave where the life expectancy was at best a few years. As Douglas recounts, I was solitary and alone within the walls of a stone prison, left to a fate of lifelong misery. I had hoped and expected much from months before, but my hopes and expectations were now withered and blasted. The ever-dreaded slave life in Georgia, Louisiana, and Alabama, from which escape was next to impossible, now in my loneliness stared me in the face. The possibility of ever becoming anything but an abject slave, a mere machine in the hands of an owner, had now fled, and it seemed to me it had fled forever. A life of living death, beset with the innumerable horrors of the cotton field and the sugar plantation, seemed to be my doom. After remaining in this life of misery and despair about a week, which seemed a month, Master Thomas, very much to my surprise and greatly to my relief, came to the prison and took me out, for the purpose, as he said, of sending me to Alabama with a friend of his who would emancipate me at the end of 8 years. He, Master Thomas, had the power and the provocation to send me without reserve into the very Everglades of Florida, beyond the remotest hope of emancipation, and his refusal to exercise that power must be set down to his credit. After lingering about St. Michael's a few days and no friend from Alabama appearing, Master Thomas decided to send me back again to Baltimore to live with his brother Hugh, with whom he was now at peace, with the promise that he would emancipate me at 25. Thanks for this one beam of hope in the future, the promise had but one fault. It seemed too good to be true. It was from Baltimore that Frederick would successfully escape, and on September 3rd, 1838, arrive in New York at the age of 21, finally to embark on a life as a free man. It would be only 4 or 5 months living in New Bedford before Douglass would meet William Lloyd Garrison, one of the most prominent leaders of the abolitionist movement. It did not take long for Douglass to be invited along their speaking tours to recount his story as a runaway slave from the South. However, Douglass, being the bright young man that he was, quickly grew bored of simply recounting his experience as a slave. He wanted to add his comments to the philosophy of the matter, but his abolitionist friends insisted that the philosophy be better left to them. Douglass recounts, "Give us the facts," said Collins. "We will take care of the philosophy." Just here arose some embarrassment. It was impossible for me to repeat the same old story by month after month and keep up my interest in it. It was new to the people, it is true, but it was an old story for me, and to go through with it night after night was a task altogether too mechanical for my nature, for I was now reading and thinking. New views of the subject were being presented to my mind. It did not entirely satisfy me to narrate wrongs. I felt like denouncing them. Besides, I was growing and needed room. "People won't believe you were ever a slave, Frederick, if you keep on this way," said friend Foster. "Be yourself," said Collins, "and tell your story." "Better have a little of the plantation speech than not," was said to me. "It is not best that you seem too learned." These excellent friends were actuated by the best motives and were not altogether wrong in their advice, and still I must speak just the word that seemed to me the word to be spoken by me. At last the apprehended trouble came. People doubted if I had ever been a slave. They said I did not talk like a slave, look like a slave, or act like a slave, and that they believed I had never been south of Mason and Dixon's line. "He don't tell us where he came from, what his master's name was, or how he got away. Besides, he is educated, and in this a contradiction of all the facts we have concerning the ignorance of the slaves." Thus, I was in a pretty fair way to be denounced as an impostor. Douglass's recounting of his experience being denounced an impostor should cause us to reflect on our own thoughts of what is the condition of a slave. That is, what makes a slave a slave. Is it the physical dominion over another, or is it the ability to shackle the mind? If it is the latter, then Douglass was indeed never a slave, in the sense that he never regarded his natural condition to be inferior, and thus everything he pursued and fought for in life, including his own education, in the face of the most grotesque oppression, was from the standpoint that indeed he was not inferior. Douglass was a glorious refutation of slavery's regard of what was considered the natural born condition of those deemed as chattel. He was such an outstanding marvel that someone could be so well-spoken, reflective, and intelligent, having lived almost their entire life as a slave and only a few years as a so-called free man. How strange that some of Douglass's abolitionist friends who condemned slavery to its very core wanted him to tone it down a bit, being too much a living contradiction of what most thought to be the mannerism and conduct of a slave. Douglass was expected to speak as an example of the unlawful brutality of slavery, but he was not to speak his thoughts that reflected the depth of soul and intellect that someone born into slavery could be a beholder of. Though Douglass would owe much of his future as a great orator and writer, and thanks to his abolitionist friends who gave him a strong start in this direction and introduced him to many important figures, Douglass would eventually distance himself from the abolitionist scripture of William Lloyd Garrison. This distancing was caused by Douglass's later recognition that there was, in fact, no pro-slavery character in the US Constitution, as Garrison had been stating. Douglass recounts in his autobiography. After a time, a careful reconsideration of the subject convinced me that there was no necessity for dissolving the union between the northern and southern states, that to seek this dissolution was not part of my duty as an abolitionist, that to abstain from voting was to refuse and exercise a legitimate and powerful means for abolishing slavery, and that the Constitution of the United States not only contained no guarantees in favor of slavery, but on the contrary, was in its letter and spirit an anti-slavery instrument, demanding the abolition of slavery as a condition of its own existence as the supreme law of the land. During this time, Douglass would start his own anti-slavery newspaper called the North Star. Along with this new editorial responsibility, Douglass would no longer leave it to the good advice of his more learned abolitionist friends, but would take the responsibility upon himself to seek out and come to know whether such assertions on the nature of the Republic were true. Douglass states, "My new circumstances compelled me to rethink the whole subject, and to study with some care not only the just and proper rules of legal interpretation, but the origin, design, nature, rights, powers, and duties of civil governments, and also the relations which human beings sustain to it. By such a course of thought and reading, I was conducted to the conclusion that the Constitution of the United States, inaugurated to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty, could not well have been designed at the same time to maintain and perpetuate a system of rapine and murder like slavery, especially as not one word can be found in the Constitution to authorize such a belief. The Constitution of our country is our warrant for the abolition of slavery in every state of the Union. Being convinced of the fact, my duty upon this point in the further conduct of my paper, The North Star, was plain. This radical change in my opinions produced a corresponding change in my action. To those with whom I had been in agreement and in sympathy, I came to be in opposition. What they held to be a great and important truth, I now looked upon as a dangerous error. Abraham Lincoln would be elected as the President of the United States on March 4, 1861. On April 12, 1861, the Civil War would officially begin and would last a terrible 4 years. Douglass would comment on his thoughts of the Civil War. "I still believed, and spoke as I believed all over the North, that the mission of the war was the liberation of the slave, as well as the salvation of the Union, that it was a great thing to achieve American independence when we numbered 3 millions, but it was a greater thing to save this country from dismemberment and ruin when it numbered 30 millions. He alone of all our presidents have the opportunity to destroy slavery and lift into manhood millions of his countrymen hitherto held as chattels and numbered with the beasts of the field." Heading into the 3rd year of the sanguinary Civil War, January 1st, 1863, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. It was at this point that Lincoln received criticism for extending the war unnecessarily. The South was ready to make certain concessions, and the North was eager to end the war. By Lincoln announcing the Emancipation Proclamation, it was thought by many to be a reckless provocation, making any possibility of peace fruitless. Frederick Douglass would have 2 meetings with President Lincoln. The first was on the subject of recruiting Black soldiers to fight in the Union Army. The details of the second meeting were on the subject of creating a type of militia along the lines of what John Brown had been planning to help slaves in the South escape to the North. At the time, it did not look like Lincoln would be elected a second term, and his concern was that peace would be made prematurely with the South, without addressing the full emancipation of those currently still kept in the bonds of slavery. As Douglass recounts in his autobiography, What he, President Lincoln, wanted was to make his Emancipation Proclamation as effective as possible in the event of such a peace. He said that he was being accused of protracting the war beyond its legitimate object and failing to make peace when he might have done so to advantage. He was afraid of what might come of all these complaints, but was persuaded that no solid and lasting peace could come short of absolute submission on the part of the rebels. He saw the danger of premature peace. I was the more impressed by this benevolent consideration because he before said, in answer to the peace clamor, that his object was to save the Union and to do so with or without slavery. What he said on this day showed a deeper moral conviction against slavery than I had ever seen before in anything he had spoken or written. I listened with the deepest interest and profoundest satisfaction, and at his suggestion agreed to undertake the organizing of a band of scouts composed of colored men whose business should be somewhat after the original plan of John Brown, to go into the rebel states beyond the lines of our armies and to carry the news of emancipation and urge the slaves to come within our boundaries. I refer to this conversation because I think that on Mr. Lincoln's part, it is evidence conclusive that the proclamation, so far at least as he was concerned, was not effected merely as a political necessity. President Lincoln would be selected to continue a second term and was inaugurated on March 4th, 1865, about 1 month after the official end of the Civil War. Lincoln would be assassinated just a mere 41 days after his inauguration. Douglas states in his autobiography, "I have often said elsewhere what I wish to repeat here, that Mr. Lincoln was not only a great president, but a great man, too great to be small in anything. Since William the Silent, who was the soul of the mighty war for religious liberty against Spain and the Spanish Inquisition, no leader of men has been loved and trusted in such a generous measure as Abraham Lincoln. In the words of Lincoln, with malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to carry for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphans to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations." I know not how many times and before how many people I have quoted these solemn words of our moderate president. They struck me at the time and have seemed to me ever since to contain more vital substance than I have ever seen compressed in a space so narrow. Yet, on this memorable occasion, when I clapped my hands in gladness and thanksgiving at their utterance, I saw in the faces of many about me expressions of widely different emotion. The Civil War was finally won, and those once under the yoke of slavery were now free. However, the struggle for equality was far from over. The slave had been freed, but had not full access to liberty, having no money, property, or friends. Douglas saw this as his cause for emancipation was not over. He recounts, "From the first, I saw no chance of bettering the condition of the freedman until he should cease to be merely a freedman and should become a citizen. I insisted that there was no safety for him or for anybody else in America outside the American government, that the liberties of the American people were dependent upon the ballot box, the jury box, and the cartridge box, that without these, no class of people could live and flourish in this country. And this was now the word for the hour with me, and the word to which the people of the North willingly listened when I spoke. I set myself to work with whatever force and energy I possessed to secure this power for the recently emancipated millions." In 1866, Douglas was elected as a delegate from the city of Rochester to attend the National Loyalist Convention, which would focus on the discussion for Reconstruction for Society of the Southern States. It was unprecedented for a city of over 60,000 white citizens and only about 200 Black residents to elect a Black man to represent them in the National Political Convention. There would be a meek attempt to try to persuade Douglas to remove himself from the position from some of his fellow delegates, since they feared that Douglas's presence could tip the scale against Republican influence in the Congress if the population were outraged to see a Black delegate. Douglas politely refused and answered that the good people of Rochester had voted him as their representative, and he intended on fulfilling the duty. One of the cities the delegates were to walk a procession through was known for its bitter hatred for the abolition movement just a few years ago. It was really not certain how the populace was going to react to seeing Douglas marching amongst the other white delegates. There were fears that a dangerous mob could be started. In the procession, the delegates were to march in pairs down the streets. No white delegate wanted to be linked arm in arm with Douglas, except for one young man named Theodore Tilton, an editor of the largest circulating journal in the state of New York. Douglas recounts, "He came to me in isolation, seized me by the hand in a most brotherly way, and proposed to walk with me in the procession. I have in my life been in many awkward and disagreeable positions when the presence of a friend would have been highly valued, but I think I never appreciated an act of courage and generous sentiment more highly than I did that of this brave young man when we marched through the streets of Philadelphia on this memorable day. Well, what came of all these dark forebodings of timid men? How was my presence regarded by the populace? I will tell you. The fears of the loyal governors who wished me excluded to propitiate the favor of the crowd met with a signal reproof. Their apprehensions were shown to be groundless, and they were compelled, as many of them confessed to me afterwards, to own themselves entirely mistaken. The people were more enlightened and had made more progress than their leaders had supposed. Along the whole line of march, my presence was cheered repeatedly and enthusiastically. I was myself utterly surprised by the heartiness and unanimity of the popular approval. We were marching through a city remarkable for the depth and bitterness of its hatred of the abolition movement, a city whose populace had mobbed anti-slavery meetings, burned temperance halls and churches owned by colored people, and burned down Pennsylvania Hall because it had opened its doors on terms of equality to people of different colors. But now the children of those who had committed those outrages and follies were applauding the very principles which their fathers had condemned. It would not be the first or last time that Douglas was struck by the very chord of what he himself knew to be true, that it was no less natural to enforce one to be a slave than to enforce one to uphold a system of slavery. Upon the removal of slavery, incredible changes and healing were observed amongst the populace, even in the most unlikely of places. On July 9, 1868, the 14th Amendment was ratified and granted citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the United States, which included former slaves recently freed. On February 26, 1869, the 15th Amendment was ratified, granting Black men the right to vote. Among Douglas's many notable achievements, he would be appointed Marshal of the District of Columbia by President Hayes in 1877, and would become the Consul General to Haiti appointed by President Harrison in 1889. It is an utmost testament to the grace and nobility of Frederick Douglass's character that as soon as the law and spirit of slavery had been broken, he made a point to no longer harbor hate and resentment for the past wrongs he committed upon himself. He recognized that humanity was indeed inherently good and would ultimately strive towards goodness if left to its natural tendency. That to punish the children of those who committed crimes before them would be to destroy any good that ever existed in the world. Douglas recounts, "If any reader of this part of my life shall see in it the evidence of a want of manly resentment for wrongs inflicted by slavery upon myself and race, and by the ancestors of those who once owned slaves, so it must be. But no man can be stronger than nature, one touch of which, we are told, makes all the world akin. I esteem myself a good, persistent hater of injustice and oppression, but my resentment ceases when they cease, and I have no heart to visit upon children the sins of their father." Douglass would revisit the place where he was born a slave and see his former master, Captain Old, who had requested a meeting with Douglass while on his deathbed. Over 25 years had passed since Douglass's escape to the North. Douglass recounts, "But now that slavery was destroyed and the slave and the master stood upon equal ground, I was not only willing to meet him, but was very glad to do so. He was to me no longer a slaveholder, either in fact or in spirit, and I regarded him as I did myself, a victim of the circumstances of birth, education, law, and custom. Our courses had been determined for us, not by us. We had both been flung by powers that did not ask our consent upon a mighty current of life, which we could neither resist nor control. By this current he was a master and I a slave. But now our lives were verging towards a point where differences disappear, where even the constancy of hate breaks down, and where the clouds of pride, passion, and selfishness vanish before the brightness of infinite light." I think I'll end the speech there.
All right.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Cynthia.
That was magnificent.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much. So as we move along, we are now going to go to our panel. So I would like to introduce our moderator, who is a wonderful person, Lamercy Frazier, and also has been in my life all my life. So I would like to tell you a little about Lamercy. Lamercy, a fiber artist and holographer and poet, has served as Director of Education and Interpretation for the Museum of African American History, Boston, Nantucket, for 15 years, highlighting the museum's collection and exhibits providing place-based education and interdisciplinary history programs, projects, and lectures, most recently promoting STEM and STEAM education pedagogy. She is an adjunct faculty for Pine Manor College in Chestnut Hill, Massachusetts, and African Americans History Advisor at Bunker Hill Community College in Charlestown, Massachusetts. She has served the artistic community for over 20 years as an award-winning national and international visual and performance artist and poet, with residencies in Brazil, Taiwan, France, Costa Rica, and Cuba. As a lecturer and workshop presenter, her audience includes both youth and adults. Lamercy is a member of Women's of Color Quilters Network and Resistant Artists at South End Technology Center and MIT Fab Lab in Boston. She was recently chosen as a City of Boston Air artist. Her fiber works serve to document history and memory and often include innovative technology. These artworks are featured in a series entitled The Quilted Chronicles and Pearls for Peace. Selected works are included in several publications and in permanent collections of the Museum of Arts and Design, the Smithsonian Institute, and the White House. I would like to thank our moderator, Lamercy, for joining us, and thank you for your contribution to the art world.
Thank you so much, Aziza. It is my pleasure to serve as moderator for this important program and extended conversation, Frederick Douglass, the Legacy of an Abolitionist. For this portion of the program, I would like, since our audience has been with us for a while, to just ask them to take a breath, relax, and be ready for what we'll be revealing from our panelists as they share their expertise in their chosen fields and the significance of their voices and work in the project that we have the commitment to produce a proposed work that honors this great giant, Frederick Douglass. I also want to take time to thank Cynthia for her wonderful reading to us. As we think about this sculpture as a part of the landscape of memory in America, we have to think about also that we share a history of over 500 years of Black and Indigenous and other people, and that the Massachusetts here, the Ponkapog, are having us on their land, and we are its good guests. Frederick Douglass was on this land, and as such, I want to know what we really know about Frederick Douglass. What do we really know? He was a formerly enslaved man, a grandson, a son, a husband, father, grandfather, a self-emancipated, self-liberated person, a superb orator, an abolitionist, friend to John Brown, and sculptor Edmonia Lewis. He was a strategist, organizer, recruiter, an author, a newspaper owner, journalist and editor, a suffragist, bank president, an ambassador, a statesman, a world traveler, and one who had audience with US presidents, importantly, Abraham Lincoln. This Frederick Douglass Memorial will reveal parts of his story, prove his dearness to us in Boston, and provide a gateway to uplift the visual voice of our community. In addition to those that you heard speak earlier, we present important makers of this memorial. Join me in welcoming our panelists. They are artist sculptor Mario Chiodo, landscape architect Diana Fernandez, and Cara Elliott Ortega, the Chief of Art and Culture for the City of Boston. I would like to share who they are in saying something more about them. Cara Elliott Ortega, as Chief of Arts and Culture in the City of Boston, has brought arts to a great level of awareness in this city. She is an urban planner in the arts, focusing on the role of art and culture, creativity in the built environment and community development. Prior to becoming the Chief of Art and Culture, she served us as Director of Policy and Planning, where she worked on implementing Boston Creates, Boston's 10-year cultural plan. She also worked at the intersection of arts and planning around the city, including supporting cultural districts, creative placemaking, and the development of cultural spaces for artists. Originally from Providence, Rhode Island, Cara received her bachelor's from the University of Chicago and her master's in city planning from MIT. Prior to the City of Boston, she worked with MIT's Community Innovators Lab in a community ownership plan for Project Row Houses in Houston, Texas, and served as the media and communications editor for the Society of Architectural Historians. Her research in the past includes the local impact of artists and art production in Detroit, the role of urban designers in complex problem solving, and in Rebuild by Design Hurricane Sandy design competition. She participated in that. She's a resident of Roxbury, we're proud to say, with an affinity for music. And Cara spends much of her time attending local shows, reading, and drawing. In this project, she is key to the representation of the city and to making sure that things go as they should. Diana Fernandez, who is a part of the Sasaki design crew, is a proven thinker, collaborator, and leader who teams effortlessly with architects, planners, urban designers, ecologists, civil engineers on the design of equitable and sustainable places. Her experience spans a broad range of projects from planning to built work. Diana provides critical thought and design leadership for landscape and planning practices in the urban studio. She brings to each project, as well as a myriad of corporate initiatives, strong critical thinking, a willingness to engage in thoughtful debate, and a commitment to quality. She leads and champions better equity and inclusion in our planning and built design practices from a landscape perspective. Prior to joining Sasaski, Diana worked as a landscape architect and project designer in Philadelphia, where she worked on urban and campus projects in the metro area. She writes and lectures in the discourses of landscape architecture, urban design, and equity. We're very happy to have both of these presenters, and last but not least, master sculptor Mario Queiroz, who is a self-taught classical sculptor from Italian parents, who sold his first work of art at the age of 18, and subsequently has earned his living sculpting public and private commissions. Mario works as an ardent creator of monuments on the subject of equality and social justice, including several prominent African Americans. His desire to create sculpture touches on social justice and brings change makers to life as his works attest to his commitment. He has among his works a series, in his first series, Abraham Lincoln, the Great Emancipator, a sculpture that reveals the pain and exhaustion of the difficult decisions made by the 16th president, our Civil War president. Other artworks include Remember Them, Champions for Humanity, that honors the tragic events of September the 11th, 2011. And it is the largest monument of its kind, located west of the Mississippi in Oakland, California. And it is the first to combine multi-generational human and civil rights activists in one artwork. Mario's received an invitation to speak at the prestigious TEDx conference in Napa Valley, in which his devoted ideas were a part of the ideas worth spreading. In that series, Mario spoke about Remember Them, Champions for Humanity, and his mission to use art as an educational medium to build cross-cultural bridges. Formerly enslaved Harriet Tubman was one of his subjects in a sculpture that he named Unwavering Courage in the Pursuit of Freedom in Wilmington, Delaware. Of his sculptures, we have The Path of Thorns and Roses, which is a part of the Freedman Cemetery for Blacks, and it was dedicated in 2014. He has worked with other communities, including that of the indigenous people of the Ohlone tribe in California. He has, throughout his project, collaborated in this particular project with one of our own artists here in Boston, who is also internationally known, nationally famous, Paul Goodnight. He is one of the residents of our community, and his works are those which have been in the arena of social justice. In a co-design model, Mario and Paul have worked together to bring us a monument of worthy value to tell the story and parts that are really illuminated about the life of Frederick Douglass. We are so happy that they were able to work together in this project to present a maquette that we would truly be proud of seeing loom large and monumental in our community and pass by every day to hail and understand and remember Frederick Douglass. So without any further ado, I would like to ask if Mario Queiroz would talk to us about his experience and the significance of this project in his life work.
Well,
Mario.
thank you. I can sit. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Oh, great. Um, I consider this a huge honor to be part of this project. Um, you know, my goal with my life's work in art is to create artwork that represents people who did extraordinary things that people were not expecting to happen. Part of sculpture, which I think is vitally important in this day and age, is that there's a realness to it. It brings you to that person in a way that feels more permanent. And I think that's why that's so important, that when you take someone like Frederick Douglass, who, how many, over 150 years ago, this man was doing things that were not expected to happen. That legacy, that story needs to be carried off to all different cultures, needs to be recognized, needs to be learned from. And the goal with the art is if we can capture the emotional spirit of who that person was, that then maybe, and I have witnessed this firsthand with people, that they will look at themselves and say, what can I do to be better to other people and better to humanity? That is the major goal of what I try to do. With the Frederick Douglass Memorial that we're working on, and working with this wonderful committee, working with Paul Goodnight, all of you, it doesn't, or I should say, the important thing that means so much also to me, and that is much bigger than me, is that it means the right things to the stakeholders and the people who live around it, and to the people, of course, who will visit it. But it has to be what you want. And I believe we got that. And it came from all these people with this endless, tireless work ethic of keeping this project going. And it's not an easy thing to do this in a public space, in a political climate. It doesn't matter if it's Boston or anywhere else. It's a very difficult process. And I commend everybody to this. I mean, this is what humanity is about. And to me, what the art that I feel is important is about. And that's why I'm so dedicated to this project, because I know everyone who's involved is so dedicated in an absolute pure reason, and getting that message out about Frederick Douglass. It is so huge when you think about it, and you think about the times he lived in and what he evolved into. It wasn't supposed to happen. Now, what kind of message is that for our youth now, who question things and worry and how can I overcome things? Frederick Douglass is the perfect example. And when I hear the reading that Cynthia did, just so you know, Cynthia, I read the email sent to me on that writing. I read it twice because I loved it so much, and more people need to see that. But everybody who's involved with this just it's important. We're all connected. We all have a hand in it. We all have a hand in making our world better. And I will say, through art, writing, the arts in general, music, that's how we make our world better than the challenges we are faced with right now. And I also think, and I'm not going to get political or anything, but this is needed in these times. It is really needed. This entire message is needed to bring people together and not divide people. So that's my initial statement on that. Oops, I can't hear you. Uh-oh.
Thank you, Mario, for that.
Okay.
We are really anticipating the beauty of what you're going to produce for this community, and very proud that you and Paul have been able to work together. Paul, as an African-American artist, has had much travail to bring his art forward, and to now combine your talents and your ways of seeing, and bring us this visual story that's so powerful about a fully orbed human being. Frederick Douglass means so much to this community. We want to honor him here as he was present in much of the abolitionist circles here and was responsible for a large impact. So when we talk about him, we do have this visionary into the 21st century even, who says that, you know, in his, as his sun was going down, he talked about we who have his legacy to uphold and continue. And Cynthia did a great job in letting us know some of what he did. And it's an enormous task. But thank you for what you have shared with us. And do I understand that there is a video that you wanted to let us be privy to?
I think that the video, Dumafi, do you play that? Because I don't know how to do it.
Hit the play button.
Oh, okay. Do I hit it?
There it goes.
There
Playing.
Behind me is the scale model of the Frederick Douglass Memorial that I'm working on. I consider it an unbelievable honor that I was chosen to create this memorial of truly one of the greatest Americans of all time. There are so many sides to Frederick Douglass and such an impact he's had on millions of people then and millions of people now. Everything about his life was extraordinary, especially when you consider the conditions he was born into of slavery. He wasn't supposed to learn to read. He wasn't supposed to be able to bring people together for equality purposes. But he accomplished that and so many other things. The child sculpture that you see here is, of course, the young Frederick Douglass. And we're depicting him that he's reading and learning to read, which was unheard of during his time for a slave child to be doing such a thing. It was forbidden. But somehow, some way, he was able to not only first learn the alphabet from his mistress who oversaw him, but he would challenge kids in the street, white boys, to challenge them, how do you spell this word? I bet you can't spell it. And ultimately, that was one of the ways he learned to read, and which would serve such an important part of his life later on and become one of the greatest orators of all time. As you look at the figure of Frederick Douglass, this is him now in his midlife. I really wanted to depict him challenging you to put an end to slavery, to understand what equality means, and that it would be shared by all people and not just by some people. And there were so many images and so much writing I had. I can't even tell you how many different variations where I resculpted his head several times in order to get this feel of determination and that feeling of moving forward, always moving forward for the betterment of all people. His influence was in so many areas, even for the suffragettes and women's equality. He was way ahead of his time. when the suffragettes had their very first convention, Frederick Douglass was the only African American who was there and spoke. This was something that was just amazing for someone of that time to do. On the right side of the book is an image I'm working on of his son Charles. Actually, Frederick Douglass had two sons that both served in the Union Army. The final composition and the final sculpture is going to be significantly larger than this. The final will be approximately 10 to 12 feet tall. It will be in bronze, which is eternal, which matches Frederick Douglass, who is eternal in our hearts and minds. So what we want here is a monument that is Frederick Douglass, but also the impact that he's had in so many areas, men, women, children. And his cause was not just for one side, it was for all people. He wanted a better life for everybody. Having Boston allow this monument to happen is significant in so many ways, including the history of Boston, where he lived for a time, so that he is never forgotten and always remembered.
Thank you for that wonderful video. I hope we can all get a copy of it because it's extremely inspiring. And it helps us to understand his national, international, and his importance to all facets of life as we look at him. And so, Mario, I want to congratulate you and Paul for this vision, and especially what you have brought to the story as artist storytellers to our community. Thank you so much for that. Now, I would like to ask if Diane Fernandez will share with us what her contributions and her company's contributions are to making this memorial happen. Diane? She with us?
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here with all of you tonight and to share a little bit about the work we've been doing with this incredible team. As Aziza and Duma had mentioned, this is it's sort of been in a long process, and we're sort of coming in at the tail end, what it feels like, hopefully. And we're super excited to have been invited to contribute our thoughts around the memorial of this landscape and consider how the siting of the sculpture itself can be embraced, can embrace not only the history of Douglass himself, but the history of Roxbury. And, you know, when we began this work, as a team, we really wanted to sort of dial in a little bit into this site and the significance of the particular location that the sculpture would be sitting within. And it was fascinating to us that this location had been called the Frederick Douglass Square for over, 130 years, and that this location here was said to be the location where Douglass had spoken in open air presentations related to the plight of slaves in America. And it was fascinating as well to kind of also understand artistic representations of the neighborhood and its vibrancy at this time. And we were really drawn by Alan Crete's work in the 1930s, illustrating our site, which fascinatingly enough is where this water fountain and light post had existed. And this site, which is sort of at the intersection of all of these streets coming together, holds so much history about Boston, and particularly about the Black and African diaspora in this part of the community. Just across the street from the site where the sculpture will sit is Slade's, which is the oldest Black-owned business for food and nightlife in Boston. Just to the right of it is the Douglas Square Pharmacy, which has been in that location since 1860 and is one of the oldest buildings in the district. It was originally a grocery store, and it served as a station for the Underground Railroad during those times. In addition to that, across the street, we also remember the Boston Guardian newspaper, which was Boston's first Black-owned newspaper, established in 1901. And again, I think what's so fascinating about this is that, you know, there's so much history surrounding this place that brings us back to Douglas's legacy. And when you see the site today, it's, you know, unassuming, but when you peel back those layers, when you reveal some of that history that existed, I think it really paints a much more robust sense of what has led to this point in our history. And, you know, as landscape architects, you know, and urban designers, we not only wanted to look at the project site itself, but to also understand its relationship to different neighborhood amenities and other gardens that play a particular importance in Douglas's legacy, like the Douglas Peace Garden, which is just to the south west of the site, which plays a really important part as creating these community connections that again reinforce a sense of place and authenticity. And our team, it's not just myself. I have an incredible, talented group. Both Aziza and Duma are just, you know, always getting their hands dirty with us and in ensuring that we're on the right track and creating a vision for this site that represents the community's vision. We also have Mel Isidore and Breeze Outlaw, who both have been incredible contributors to this work, and each of us sort of brings this passion for evoking what a Black landscape could be. And our inspiration really came from trying to bring all of these pieces together. So how do we meet the needs of finding a location that's appropriate to commemorate Douglas as a sculpture? And how do we think about other site amenities that can, again, start to tell the story of this palimpsest, right, of all of these histories that exist within this neighborhood? And, you know, our ultimate inspiration came from Mario and his team. The sculpture itself is just an incredible manifestation of Douglas's legacy. And we wanted to figure out a way in which the plaza could respond to that. And not only did we want to think about just citing the sculpture, but thinking about how the materials themselves also tell the story of this African diaspora and about this resilience that's sort of built into the culture of this place. So everything from the materiality of the pavers that are going to be cited on the site, you know, using reflective materials that, again, really talk about the reflective qualities of being free that Douglas spoke about often in his work, to the use of Corten metal and wood to bring that warmth, that connection back to Africa and this diaspora that really defines that landscape. And in addition to that, also thinking about how, you know, signage and wayfinding can help to further enhance and tell the story of this place. We also did this amazing dive, and Breeze did a wonderful job here telling us about heritage planting and particularly African-American practices of gardening and how important these spaces were to the substance, to the livelihood, and the spiritual well-being of communities. We took inspiration from Bon Sill's exhibition at the Smithsonian, where she photographed African-American gardens of the South, to give us an illustration of how these spaces sort of unfolded. And it really led us down this path of really celebrating difference and diversity, textures, thinking about medicinal qualities within the plant material itself, again, to evoke this sort of memory and spirituality that is such a big part of this neighborhood. We also wanted to ensure that we were tying into neighborhood trends. The Roxbury Sunflower Project is an incredible effort that's happening in the neighborhood, and we wanted to bring some of that beauty, that community-defined beauty, into our site as well. And it really all came together in this way to sort of celebrate Douglas and the sculpture and this sort of collage here. And this collage is put together by Mel Isidore. She's an incredible urban designer and planner. And really what we wanted to do here is to give you a sense of the spirit of the place, of how this vegetation and lushness is creating a place for you to stop, to reflect, to look back on his legacy, and project out into the future and see this landscape really reflecting this community in place. And we will, want to end with sort of, this quote that has shaped the work we do, and I think speaks a little bit to what Mario said earlier during our presentation, which is that we have to do with the past only as we can make it useful to the present and future. And it's such an exciting moment for us to be able to present this little piece of hope within this plaza and sculpture for future generations to see how Black bodies can thrive in public space, and that we're taking our first step towards that. And with that, we just want to say thank you. And we're really excited to continue to realize this vision. And there's a GoFundMe link that I think will be shared in the Google chat to help realize this vision. So make sure to check that out if you're interested.
Oh, thank you so much, Diane, for laying that out for us, and the concepts that made what your landscape feel like we can own this and be in it and be comfortable. So thank you so much for that. And kudos to your team. I would like now, you're welcome. I'd like now, if I may, to bring forward our Chief of Arts and Culture in the city of Boston, Cara Elliott Ortega, who has a part in looking at projects and making them happen and seeing what's fitting for Boston. And so with that, I'd like Cara to tell us what was impacting to her about this project, its significance to us, and her work with respect to the committee and how things were managed. So Cara, could you help speak to this for us?
Sure. Well, I have to say it's just so exciting to see all of these presentations back to back and see the vision kind of building. I've seen the artwork as it's been developed, and seen some of the images for the plaza and the design. But to see it come together as a as a real place all together, kind of holistically, is really exciting for me. I think what this project brings to the city is pretty remarkable. We released a cultural plan in 2016. It's a 10-year plan for enhancing arts and culture in the city, and it's the first cultural plan that the city of Boston has ever done. And this project just hits so many of the goals and kind of ambitions and spirit of what that was trying to speak to, to support local artists, to support the development of new, really significant public art in the city. And I think now an issue that we're wrestling with, that cities across the country are wrestling with, which is how to tell our story better and our history fully, and really embrace what our identity should be as a city and how we represent ourselves in cultural symbols and in public space. And I think as a city, we're really known kind of to tourists for the Freedom Trail and for kind of a certain side of colonial history. But we have this amazing, rich abolitionist history in Boston. And how can we really celebrate that and symbolize that and make that visible, but not just kind of to people visiting, but also in our neighborhoods and in the places where those historic events and conversations actually happened. So I think that this is really speaking to that. We have this opportunity and I think an obligation to provide those moments of education and celebration, not just of the abolitionist history, but even more broadly of Boston's role as a central place for Black history and thought and politics in the United States. So from a city arts perspective, this project is hitting all of those things, and that's been really remarkable. And we're here to support that vision as much as possible. I think the other thing that we're learning right now, and we're learning from this project, and we're learning as we commission our own public artwork, is about what is missing in that landscape really concretely. Like, what do we really know about the city's public art collection and what's been produced over time and the dynamics of that? We have a Percent for Art program that's still pretty young for us. We're still learning a lot about what it means to commission artwork as a part of city capital projects. And so, what does it mean when most of our public art is of kind of white colonial figures? What are we really representing about ourselves to our own residents? We're actually doing an assessment right now of our current public art collection to get an even clearer picture of that, of how many subjects and who's represented and who were the artists who got to tell those stories and were commissioned to do so. So I think that this is just really an amazing time to have this artwork. And I have to commend the partners, some of whom are represented on this call, who have just been really tenacious in getting this project done and moving it forward. I think something that we're also learning is how important it is to support community-driven art, and that we have to do an even better job of finding ways to fund and support that and bring it to fruition and really marshal a lot of different parts of city government to support that work. And it's not just the arts office, it's also parks and public works and all these other departments that have to really come together around this commitment to the vision, right? And commitment to the community that's been working to move it forward, and really hearing that and being able to respond to it. So I'm hoping that in addition to kind of creating this amazing place, that this is a time where the city can also respond and kind of answer that call, I guess.
Okay. So thank you so much for that vision, that we may not all know how these monuments happen, how these memorials come about, but Carol, what you have given us is some idea of what it takes to make this happen, and working with your team, people like Karen Goodfellow and others who are germane to the project, even happening in a consistent basis, with it taking a number of years for this to come about, and to now see the joy of it about to be manifest in the city is something I would like to raise as we think about what it's going to take to really make it fully be present. And with that, though, giving all the respect to the Frederick Douglass Sculpture Committee, its tenaciousness, its persistence, its dedication for us to be able to claim Frederick Douglass and Tamario as they help us to democratize this Boston landscape. So thank you very much for what you've offered us in this conversation. And what I'd like to offer is that we have time for questions and answers. And if any of our audience would like to participate in what we call the Q&A, the question and answers, please write your questions, and you can let us know what you're thinking about what is about to happen in your city. And those of us who are in other places, that you will come to Boston and see this when it really happens. So please put your questions in, and we will try to answer all that we can into our chat box and into our Q&A. If there are any questions that any of the panelists have and would like to offer, or anyone participating, please offer your questions up. We are happy to talk about this phenomenal event in Boston's history, with what's in its landscape, what it can offer as history lesson, what is food for our children in their field studies, as they will at some point be permitted to be together We know that's one of our challenges right now. COVID-19 has put us in some thinking spaces that we had not to consider before. But to be able to realize that there is a point where we will be able to come back together and explore this journey of what a monument, and especially that one of Frederick Douglass, means to us. So as we think about Frederick Douglass, and we have a responder here who is Nina La Negra, one of our community people from Lower Roxbury, UNLR, and a certified Boston artist. She said she would love to receive any slides that were presented and included on our presentation today, and any future activity of the project. Frederick Douglass, she says, is worthy of the respect that this statue will represent. Thank you so much, Nina. We appreciate that. Okay. So is there a space for Nina to talk? Certainly. We'd like to have you talk if you want to, Nina. She's one of our Boston activists who has been looking at spaces in Boston and protesting, and always a voice in the community. So.
Protesting, yes, that's what I'm known for these days, making a lot of noise. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Thank you. I don't quite know who's speaking. Is this Diana?
No, it was Lamerchi was speaking. But you're speaking now. So just tell us what you want us to know.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, it's very interesting, and I don't know what everyone does here. I'm grateful to be invited. Thank you, DeMoffice. I only just saw the invite moments ago, but I have been very much involved with the spaces of Lower Roxbury down to the moment, and there is a protracted battle, and what I'm noticing, and I'm hoping that this is not going to be true of Lower Roxbury.
Oh, did we lose you? Oh my. I'm not sure we didn't lose her. Well, we appreciate that Nina was going to share with us, and I would like to go on to another participant, and his name is Lucien Charlot. Nice to hear African roots being evoked in the sculpture. He wants to ask if some Haitian Caribbean roots might be evoked somehow, with Douglass having been ambassador to Haiti, having represented Haiti in a Chicago fair in 1993, and having a similar trajectory with Haitian revolutionary Toussaint Louverture, about whom Douglass also wrote, Douglass has ties to Haiti. Charlotte Lucien. Thank you for that. Is there anyone who would like to speak to answer Charlotte's question about the sculpture being representative of Haiti and reference to Haiti? Mario, maybe you can speak to that. You'll have to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know what happened. I think that because of the location in Boston and where it's at, that needs to be discussed with the local community to understand it. But however, I also believe because Frederick Douglass, was a representative to Haiti, I think that that's something, worth having a discussion about.
Okay. All right. Okay, so if we
Oh, I'm sorry. Just to add to that, Mamerch, I think it's also, as we mentioned during our presentation, I think the landscape has taken on a role that further takes this African diaspora, right? That is true of those Caribbean nations, because Hispaniola was the first island where the transatlantic slave trade started. Really coming about in both the materiality and the signage and wayfinding that we're thinking for the site. So I certainly think there's opportunity there as the signage evolves to include some of those histories in writing, and to be able to share more about how that diaspora itself not only reflects Douglas's legacy, but the landscape you're within as well.
Okay, thank you for that.
Um,
Yes, is there anyone else who'd like to add to it?
Me. Hi.
Okay.
Me.
Fine.
Hi.
Hi.
Yes, I am impressed with the progress that's been done with this project, and to speak to all these other things that are not represented in the sculpture, but that should be said and shared with the neighborhood and the public. I think that our Frederick Douglass Peace Garden area, that right now it's quartered with a chain link fence, could be developed into a visitor center where we could have slides, a video presentation of the history of Frederick Douglass, of all these connections that we have talked about, to Haiti, to his to Europe, all his work, which was beyond abolition, and his biography, in fact, could be exposed in slides, in a visual presentation there, and make this part of a longer, bigger designed in Lower Roxbury that could be a greenway, not just these two parks, the Bessie Barnes Garden and the Bessie Barnes Park, but then move to Melniakas Boulevard and maintain all that greenery, and have the city give back to the neighborhood all that land that was taken from the neighborhood for that terrible project of a highway. We need to have that land back, and I think this would be it could be the continuation of this project that celebrates the history of our neighborhood. That's what I wanted. So I'd like to talk to Diana more about how we could design something for the Frederick Douglass Peace Garden. I was thinking of solar panels and something that could be, really modern, and that we could maintain and be proud of, and have the neighborhood sustain it. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Yvonne. The possibility of innovation within the design to even move it further into the hands of the community. Nina is back. She was booted off and now wants a chance to share some more of her thoughts with us. And I'd like to say that we have a little more, just a brief time to be with you and to continue this conversation. So, Nina, you have our ears.
Thank you. I hope I can keep them for and not get booted again. Thank you, Lamerchi. And thank all of you for working so hard on this. It's very important to have these images and these messages. And excuse the siren, but I live right in the heart of it. And it's loud here. And I'm not outside, I'm indoors. But an important.
Oh, oh my goodness, I think it happened again. Well, Nina, if you will just share some of your thoughts about this into the chat, and we can send it out to the people who are listening. And because your voice is an important voice in this community, we want to honor that, and any thoughts that you might have about the project and the Roxbury community as you see it. We want to thank for from all of us who were able to come to you tonight. I would like to say we have been witness to a great moment where we are going to look at the power of art to bring us together at the intersections of history, memory, and spatial justice. And that which we want to see in our communities and loom large. We want to look at the tenacity of the Frederick Douglass Sculpture Committee to help us have this moment. People who are really dedicated and committed to what they wanted to see and honor in a bronze sculpture in this Frederick Douglass Memorial and its attending landscape. We want to thank, as it is noted, that the Boston Art Commission approved this public art project, and it is therefore partly funded with $300,000 by the Edward Ingersoll Brown Fund, and that there is an ongoing campaign to complete what is needed to help it happen. I will give you some details about that after I thank and acknowledge those who are partners in this project and the collaboration of community stakeholders, the city, the United Neighbors of Lower Roxbury, of which Nina is a part. A partial list of other strategic partners would include Mayor Walsh's Office of Art and Culture, Color Circle Art Publishing with Paul Goodnight, Museum of African American History, the National Center of African American Artists, People's Baptist Church, 33 Fusion, and the ZZ Gallery, along with other prominent community members like Byron Rushing and others who wanted to see Frederick Douglass as a lifelong mission in this city to bring him to visitors and to help us understand those who would be inspired by what he had to say, his life work, and what he's done. Importantly, we want to once again thank Mario Kiudo and the artists who are like him, making sculptures that represent things that we can be proud of today, that are not sculptures that we are thinking about dissolving and taking down. So I'm hoping that this one will be in our sight for time to come, and especially past some of our lifetimes right now. We want to really be diligent about helping this to come about by looking at the GoFundMe page that has been created by this project. If you want to become involved, there are contribution levels that you can visit by coming to www.gofundme.com Frederick Douglass Sculpture. This is an effort for you to contribute to the project in many different categories, as you see listed here on the slide that is in front of you. This is an important piece, and it is our understanding for us to own it collectively. And in so doing, we can help this effort by going to www.gofundme.com /F/Frederick Douglass -sculpture. And so it has been our privilege to be with you. We thank our audience tonight. We thank all the panelists. We thank Cynthia Chung, Aziza Robinson, Dumas, and Sarah who has been our technician behind the scenes to help this happen. Dumas and Sarah, who has been our technician behind the scenes to help this happen. We are so grateful that you have joined us, and we hope that you will spread the word that Frederick Douglass is coming to town. And we will be in that space at Frederick Douglass Square with its beauty and its celebration of a wonderful life. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for any events that are going to happen.